Hey, I'm Dwayne Reeder here at the Clemente Museum. We're upstairs in the area where this museum started when it was just an archive. And we're really excited to do what we're doing today because we've never done anything like this. We asked all our followers to send in some questions, and the questions came in, and hey, let's get started. So first question, did Roberto like to paint or do any kind of artwork? It's a little on the sad side because Roberto developed a sleeping problem because when he went to bed, he started dreaming about dying in a plane crash. So at one point, he stopped going to bed at night and working on pottery. He threw pottery in Puerto Rico. They had 3 kilns and a pottery wheel where him and Vera would sit up at night and make pots. And Vera tells the story that they would do it all night until they heard the milkman putting the milk in the milk box upstairs. And some of you young guys don't know, or young gals don't know about the milkman putting milk on the stoop. And so that was the sign. And Roberto would take these little cat naps during the day. But he threw pottery. He painted velvet paintings, which how cool is that? He made artwork out of driftwood. He would walk on the beach and just to kind of clear his head and get some, some kind of alone time, and he'd walk out along the coast and grab cool pieces of driftwood and then make little pieces of art. But I was lucky enough in 1994 when we're working on the Clemente calendar, I go to the house with Vera, and she brought these lamps out of a room that he made. He would take these brass cylinders, he would drill holes in the brass cylinders and glue gemstones and cool little kind of crystals and things like that, and then hang them with a chain. So he was always doing something with his hands and always trying to stay awake at night so that he didn't have to have that dream. Okay, question number 2. What was his go-to food out on the road? And this is a great question because I know a couple little stories. There's a few. One was told to me by Les Banos, the team photographer, who would travel with Roberto quite a bit because he was a foreigner. He would hang with the Latinos and the blacks, and they would all kind of go to dinner together. And Roberto took everybody one night to a Chinese restaurant. He loved Chinese food. And so they go to this restaurant, and Les Banos said it was like a comedy show because it was hard to communicate with the Chinese waiter and Roberto and his accent, and Les Banos was Hungarian. He had this accent, and everybody, it was very, he goes, we should have been filming. It could have been a little film. Question number 3, and this one for me goes back to literally like one of the first things I learned about Roberto. Back when I'm working on the photos for the calendar, we were asked what pictures did Clemente have a hard time with and which pictures did he hit the tar out of. And so I did a photograph of his bats all lined up with a baseball signed by each of the pitchers that were Hall of Famers that Roberto batted over 300 against. Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, Tom Seaver, Ferguson Jenkins, and it goes on and on. So Roberto hit the best pitchers over 300. Lefty Carlson, he hit lefty over 300. So all these years, I'm like, he could hit just about anybody. And if you read about him, he was a really good bad ball hitter. So somebody be throwing him outside, he eventually is going to hit that ball. So I called Manny Sanguillen, big part of the Clemente Museum, one of Roberto's best friends. I said, Manny, there has to be somebody. Who did Roberto have a hard time batting against? And Manny just started laughing, and he goes, you won't believe it. Dave Justy and Nelson Briles. And I'm like, wait a minute, Manny, they played for the Pirates. And he goes, yeah, Roberto made them trade for them to get him on the Pirates so he didn't have to bat against them anymore. I mean, that's probably the coolest story ever right there. And then it's very, very famous stories about Roberto being asked by the Pirates. It literally got out in the media, and Vera would tell the story when people ask her, the Pirates would ask Roberto, should we sign Dave Justy for another year? And Roberto would be like, Yeah, I think he still has it. He's still got a good arm. I think we should keep him on the teams. Question number 4. Did Roberto Clemente play any other positions than right field? That's a good one. One of the first photos I've ever found of Roberto is from 1951. He's playing shortstop for a team in Puerto Rico called the Rojos, Sella Rojos. He played shortstop. And I have a photo here of the team, and he has a little mustache. It's one of the only photos of Roberto with facial hair. And the other part of this is that he wanted to pitch. He always wanted to pitch. And the Pirates wouldn't let him because that arm, right? If you're throwing long throws from the outfield and then you go to the mound and it's only 90 feet and you're throwing, that's a whole different movement and muscles. And so the Pirates did not want him to pitch because they were afraid he'd throw his arm out. Question number 5. What was my favorite play of Roberto Clemente? My favorite play on the field? The 71 World Series, which we are in 2021. This is the 50th year anniversary of the 71 World Series, which he's MVP. He's in Baltimore. He hits a hard one to deep right field. Roberto catches it on one bounce. He's got it all figured out in his head, and that's the thing that made Roberto. He was very smart about how he made these plays. So he envisioned himself spinning around and making this throw. So what happens is he catches it on one bounce. As he's spinning around, he throws it to third base on like a bullet on a rope. And I feel bad for Richie Hebner because he had to make that catch. He makes the tag. He looked out. The ump calls him safe. And Earl Weaver, when he was interviewed, he said that was the turning point in the World Series. He goes, it was an out, but it just put the fear into us. And from then on, no one wanted to run against Roberto's arm when you got to see that cannon. So that kind of messed up the Baltimore Orioles a little bit. The Pirates win. So that's pretty cool. However, I would say, I didn't see this because I wasn't alive and there's no footage of it, but it's the only time in Major League Baseball history that someone hits a walk-off grand slam in the park home run. Roberto does it in 1956. He hits one into the gap in Forbes Field, which you know center field was 457. He goes all the way around third base. The third base coach has his hands up. Roberto blows right through him because he's like, no way, we need this to win. He slides into home, safe. Pirates win. The Pirates fine him for running through the signs. They end up giving him the money back, and they didn't end up making him pay. But that's the only time that's ever happened in MLB history. A walk-off grand slam in the Parker, 1956, Roberto Clemente. So that's a good one. Question number 6. What's my favorite game day story? There's a couple interesting stories about Roberto in the locker room pre-game. I've been lucky to hear a few through the years from Tony Barterone, Manny, Rennie Stennett, but Steve Blass told me a really, really good one. Roberto, you know, had a bad back. He was in a car crash on New Year's Eve of 1954 and messed up his back and his neck. And you know, he always did the neck thing. And so he would try to, you know, kind of get loose before he went to bat. So he taught Tony Barterone how to do a technique on his back and do some, you know, kind of massage type therapy and stretch his muscles and stuff. And so he would get this done almost prior to every game. And so here it is, it's one game. He's on the table. Tony's working on him. Everybody's dressed on the field. Roberto had this technique where he would jump into his uniform and run out on the field. Well, Steve Blass, hides his uniform. So here it is, game time, game's ready to start. Murtaugh's looking for Roberto, and he comes out with a robe or something and says that, you know, Blass had to tell him, hey, I hid your uniform here. He's late for the game. Murtaugh's freaking out. It's like, oh my gosh. So it's just a really cute, they were always kind of nibbing around in the locker room, and especially Blass, he was the #1, always playing pranks on people. So there it was, he hides Clemente's uniform and gets him in trouble with Murtaugh for a minute till he confesses that he hid the uni. So just kind of a cute story, one that hopefully you never heard before. Question number 7, did Roberto mentor other players? all the young players, period. Roberto would kind of take them under their wings. And so Rennie Stennett, Jackie Hernandez, Dave Cash, all those guys, when they're coming up with the Pirates, Roberto would take those guys and he would talk to them and, you know, kind of explain that, you know, he'd been a veteran at that point. And a lot of the guys would get very nervous about playing. And Roberto would just kind of try to calm their nerves and just say, hey, you know, it is what it is. If you mess up, you make an error, something happens, you go 0 for 4, it'll all be okay. You know, don't get too down on yourself. So he was always kind of trying to give them little pep talks to keep their spirits up. In spring training, he would tell the guys, the young guys, that go to bed early. He said, you gotta get your sleep. Don't go out and have beers with the veteran players. They knew what they were doing. They had their positions locked in. He was like, get to bed early. You had to get out and be on the field by 8 o'clock in the morning. He's like, get some sleep, take care of yourself, eat right. So he was always constantly giving these guys, you know, just a little bit of, you know, direction. He kept his room in Bradenton where all the other veteran players went and got a house on the beach. Roberto stayed in his room in Bradenton right up until the day he died. So there's a little plaque, and we actually have one hanging here in the museum that was hung on his door. Question number 8, how did Vera and Roberto meet? So he spends 9 years of his major league career here a single man. And you know Roberto, good-looking guy, well-dressed, very quiet. He is now 1963, the winter of 63. He's home in Puerto Rico. He would go in the mornings to this pharmacy that had like a little diner and would sell the newspapers. And Roberto would go and read the newspaper in the morning, and this guy would make him, you know, some like bacon and eggs. And so one day he's there and he sees Vera walking into the pharmacy. And he was like, hey, I've never seen that girl before. And he looks over at his buddy who runs the place, and he said, hey, go for a little walk. So the guy disappeared for a little bit, and Roberto scoots behind the counter. And now here comes Vera to check out, and there's Roberto, and everybody on the island of Puerto Rico knew who Roberto Clemente was. And she sees him, and she's like almost in a little bit of shock. And he starts talking, and he said, hey, maybe we could go out sometime. And she literally got all flustered, didn't even take what she was getting, and ran out the door. She worked in a bank across the street. Roberto got his buddy to come back in, and he said, hey, I'm going to go open an account over there at that bank. And he ends up going to her and get in her line, and he goes to her and tries to open this account. Her dad was very strict. She had a brother, Orlando, in the military who kind of watched over her. She told him that she wouldn't be allowed. He would have to go to her house and ask her father, and that's what he does. He leaves the bank, and he goes and finds her dad and talks to him and says that he wants to ask her out on a date. And Pepito, is what they called him, Pepito let him go on a date with chaperones. And so that was it. He was telling people shortly after that was going to be the woman that he married. And sure enough, November of 64, they're married, and they have the 3 kids, Roberto, Luis, and Ricky. And that's kind of the way Vera meets. Number 9, this is a great question because you stumped me. What was Roberto and Vera's wedding song? It took me a couple days to even find this one out. I had to call some family members. I always knew that Elsa Coulong would talk about him loving to dance, and he would pick songs that were like the waltz. And so this song is kind of that genre. Take a look it up. It's a style of music called dances, and it's kind of classical waltz music. And Roberto could really dance, so him and Vera, all eyes were on them when they were dancing. Number 10, what do I wish more people knew about Roberto Clemente? Most of you guys know that he died in a plane crash helping people. He helped, he tried to help as many people as he could. So he was a great humanitarian. There are some little stories that we do tell here at the museum, and one that we helped unearth. He spent every Friday while he was in Pittsburgh going to the Pittsburgh Center for the Blind and working with the blind kids. And that was pretty awesome. And he told the woman there, if you tell the media and the media comes to take photos or things like that, he would quit coming. And she came here and told me the story and brought me some photos. They had once he took the kids to Forbes Field to a game, and that's where the team photographer, Les Banos, took a couple photos. This was 1969. They were in the stands, and Roberto got some of the other players to jump in and sign some baseballs for them. So that was a pretty special thing. So he was doing these little things behind the scenes. He would go to Children's Hospital and he would tell them the same thing. Don't tell anybody, don't tell the media that I'm coming here. If they show up, I'll quit coming. And so he was doing it for the right reasons, because he literally wanted to spend some time with those kids and talk to them and get to know them a little bit, and then bring them gifts. He'd bring them signed baseballs and gloves and bats and stuff like that. So that was pretty awesome. Keep the questions coming. We're going to do this again. I kind of like doing this because you got me to do some homework and find some things out. You guys can follow us, keep checking us out on Facebook and Instagram, but you can also go to our website, ClementeMuseum.com, and you can also, make a donation if you want to help us here, keep our mission going. Every penny counts. I tell people, it's 2021, so $21 makes a difference. And keep the questions coming. Thank you.